The year is 2026, and Nicolás Maduro is no longer speaking from a balcony or surrounded by loyal generals. He is sitting in a holding cell thousands of miles away from Caracas. Before this moment hardens into a clean headline or a single paragraph in a history book, one truth must be understood clearly. This was not the result of one military operation, one political deal, or one dramatic betrayal. What finally brought Maduro down was set in motion long before the arrest. It was an economic collapse so deep and so unforgiving that it slowly stripped him of power, loyalty, and protection until there was nothing left to hold him up. Venezuela was never meant to be a poor country. It held the largest proven oil reserves on Earth, more than any other nation. The country had fertile land, access to the sea, and generations of educated professionals. On paper, Venezuela should have been one of the most prosperous nations in the Western Hemisphere. Instead, within a single decade, nearly 80% of its economy disappeared. This was not a recession. It was an economic extinction. Wealth did not slowly decline. It evaporated. Money lost meaning. Savings were erased, and ordinary transactions became acts of panic rather than planning. When Maduro came to power in 2013, he inherited an economy already weakened by years of oil dependence. For decades, oil money had distorted everything. The national currency grew artificially strong, making imports cheap and local production uncompetitive. Farms shut down. Factories stopped expanding. Venezuela stopped making things and survived almost entirely on oil exports. As long as oil prices stayed high, the illusion held. But underneath, the system was hollow. Critical industries were neglected, and technical expertise was replaced with political loyalty. The oil industry itself, the heart of the entire economy, had been quietly sabotaged years earlier. Thousands of experienced engineers and geologists were fired from the state oil company and replaced by loyalists who lacked the technical knowledge to maintain complex infrastructure. Pipelines corroded, refineries decayed, and production efficiency collapsed. Instead of investing to fix these problems, the government treated the oil company as a personal cash machine. Revenue was pulled out to fund political survival rather than long-term stability. When global oil prices crashed in 2014, the illusion shattered. The cash flow that supported subsidies, social programs, and military loyalty dried up almost overnight. At this moment, the government faced a choice. It could reduce spending, reform the economy, or accept painful adjustments. Instead, it chose denial. The central bank began printing money on a massive scale. What followed was not inflation, but hyperinflation so extreme that it destroyed the very concept of money. Prices did not rise yearly or monthly. They rose daily, sometimes hourly. Salaries became meaningless. A paycheck could lose most of its value before the end of the week. People spent money the moment they received it, buying anything tangible because holding cash was like holding ice in the sun. The national currency became so worthless that it was cheaper to throw it away than to use it. Trust, the invisible foundation of any economy, collapsed completely. With the currency destroyed, food shortages followed. Imports became impossible. Local production was already crippled, and store shelves emptied. Hunger spread across the country. The government responded by controlling food distribution, turning survival into a political weapon. Subsidized food boxes were distributed selectively, rewarding loyalty and punishing dissent. Protesting meant risking starvation. At the same time, corruption flourished. Officials profited by importing low-quality food at inflated prices, while ordinary people suffered malnutrition. Scarcity was no longer a failure of policy. It became a method of control. As living conditions deteriorated, Venezuelans made a rational decision. They left. Millions fled the country. creating the largest migration crisis in modern Western Hemisphere history. Entire professions disappeared almost overnight. Doctors, engineers, teachers, and technicians escaped in search of dignity and survival. Hospitals lost staff, power stations lost expertise, and oil facilities lost the people who knew how to repair them. Venezuela was not just losing population, it was bleeding out its future. The consequences became impossible to ignore in 2019, when the country experienced massive nationwide blackouts. Electricity failed, water systems shut down, hospitals went dark, and transportation collapsed. Patients died not from illness, but from power loss. The government blamed sabotage and foreign enemies, but the reality was simpler and more brutal. Years of neglect had finally caught up. Infrastructure left to decay eventually fails. At that moment, economic mismanagement stopped being theoretical and became a direct threat to human life. To keep the system alive, the regime made a quiet retreat from its own ideology. The national currency was effectively abandoned, and the US dollar was allowed to circulate freely. This created a divided society. A small minority with access to dollars lived in visible comfort, while the majority remained trapped in poverty. Luxury stores appeared next to slums. Imported goods returned, but production did not. The economy survived on remittances, laundering, and informal activity, not real growth. It looked like recovery, but it was an illusion. When oil revenues and taxes failed to sustain the state, the regime turned to extraction in its most literal form. Illegal gold mining expanded into protected regions of the Amazon. These operations were controlled by military units and criminal groups. Mercury poisoned rivers, forests were destroyed, and indigenous communities suffered. Gold was flown out of the country in exchange for untraceable cash. Venezuela stopped functioning like a nation and began operating like an extraction network, draining whatever value remained. In 2024, Maduro was offered a final opportunity: sanctions relief in exchange for free and fair elections. The economy could have reopened to the world, investment could have returned, the country could have begun to recover. Instead, the vote was manipulated, and the deal collapsed. Sanctions returned, investors fled, and even the military understood the message. As long as Maduro remained, Venezuela would remain economically isolated. With fewer options left, criminal activity filled the gap. Drug trafficking networks expanded, drawing international attention and legal pressure. Indictments and bounties transformed loyalty into a calculation. When payments to key figures slowed and protection weakened, the system began to fracture. By late 2025, the money was running out, and so was patience. When Maduro finally fell in early 2026, there was no dramatic final stand. The structure around him had already collapsed. The economy had stripped him of loyalty long before the arrest. He was no longer an asset worth protecting. He was a liability. The conclusion is unavoidable. Maduro did not fall simply because of ideology or politics. He fell because he tried to ignore economic reality. Wealth cannot be printed. Resources cannot replace productivity. Power cannot survive without trust. Venezuela lost most of its economy, erased its